There's a very good reason to believe in innateness of moral principles, which in fact was given by David Hume, who pointed out that we're constantly making moral decisions in new situations, and we do it pretty consistently and consistently with others, which suggests that there must be some internal, he didn't put it this way, but I think we would now put it as by saying that there must be some internal generative system, obviously some finite system, because we're finite objects, that determines, given circumstances, what a reasonable moral response would be over some range. That doesn't mean that it's independent of culture. Every innate property, like height, let's say, or vision, whatever it may be, is affected by external events, usually in early childhood, that shape what we do, including our language and so on. So that would presumably be the case for moral principles as well. John Rawls picked this up in his theory of justice and gave a kind of a neo-Kantian version of it, which in its original, in the book itself, is based in part on models from generative grammar, explicitly. He came under very sharp criticism for that from philosophers, and he kind of put it aside and kept the things that interested him more. But it was picked up by a young philosopher, John Michael, in, I guess, about 15 years ago, who responded to the criticisms, I think, pretty effectively, and tried to develop something like a universal moral grammar, and initiated some experimental work with an experimental psychologist, Elizabeth Spelke, and they tried to do some studies of how children would respond to moral dilemmas, trolley-type dilemmas and others, and try to elicit some principles that might account for the way they're doing it. That was later picked up by Mark Hauser, and I understand you've been working on this, and others who've tried to show that there are culturally independent moral principles that can be formulated sort of analogous to principles of universal grammar that would yield the consequences that Hume observed, provide the capacity for making moral decisions presumably in principle in an unbounded range of conditions and circumstances. Doesn't mean they're always going to give an answer. Often they don't, but over some range would give answers. So I think that's a reasonable project by now, and even part of empirical science with comparative studies, cross-cultural and so on, with children and so on. Incidentally, that leaves open a question, an interesting question, as to the difference between our innate principles and what are the true moral principles. But that's a question that there's some interesting work on this by a young German philosopher, Matthias Malmann, legal philosopher, who pointed out, among other things, that this is quite similar to problems that arise in epistemology. So we have certain methods that we use, they're instinctive, for trying to find what Charles Peirce called abductive principles without defining them. Principles that we use somehow to go from a range of evidence and a range of background knowledge to ideas about what might be the explanation for them. And that's our means of trying to advance knowledge and understanding. But it raises the same question. Maybe these are the wrong means, and they lead us away from understanding and knowledge. If so, we're stuck.